The scary sound of a bone snapping is distinct. It is a wet, hollow crack that echoes louder than a twig snapping in winter, sharp and unmistakable. Lillian Crow's scream tore from her throat before she could stop it. A raw animal noise of pain that made every passenger in first class whip their heads around in horror. Her body slammed sideways into the aisle divider, shoulder connecting with the hard plastic edge with enough force to rattle the overhead bins. Her right arm hung at an angle that defied anatomy, twisted wrong, bent where no joint should bend. The flight attendant stood over her, chest heaving, one hand still clenched tight enough that her knuckles had gone white. Veronica Hale's face was flushed red, a vein pulsing visibly at her temple. Her perfectly pressed uniform somehow looking disheveled despite not a single wrinkle showing. Sweat beaded along her hairline. She refused, Veronica panted, speaking to no one and everyone at once. She absolutely refused to follow crew instructions. I had no choice but to physically restrain her for the safety of this aircraft. Lillian sobbed, clutching her broken arm against her chest with her good hand, tears streaming down her dark brown face in rivers that caught the harsh overhead lighting. Her glasses had been knocked askew, hanging from one ear. The modest floral dress she'd worn so carefully that morning was twisted around her thin frame, one sleeve torn at the shoulder. A man in 2C had his phone out, recording. A woman in 3A covered her mouth with both hands, eyes wide with shock. Someone shouted for a doctor. Someone else demanded to know what the hell was happening. Veronica raised her voice over the chaos, projecting with the authority of 23 years managing passenger compliance. This passenger became aggressive and non-compliant. I used appropriate force to prevent a dangerous situation from escalating further. The captain has been notified. Everything is under control. Under control? A middle-aged woman with perfectly highlighted hair stood up in 4B, fury making her voice shake. You just broke an old woman's arm. I watched you. She wasn't doing anything. Ma'am, I need you to remain seated, Veronica snapped, her tone shifting instantly to ice-cold command. This is none of your concern. Return to your seat or you will also be reported for interfering with flight crew duties. The woman hesitated, outrage warring with self-preservation, then slowly lowered herself back down. But her eyes never left Lillian's crumpled form. Lillian rocked slightly, making small wounded sounds that were somehow worse than screaming. The pain radiated up her arm in waves, white-hot and nauseating. She couldn't think past it, couldn't organize words, could only exist in this terrible moment where everything had gone so wrong so fast and she didn't understand how or why. A businessman in an expensive suit knelt beside her, his face creased with concern. Ma'am, try not to move. We're getting help. Can you tell me your name? Lillian, she whispered through tears. My arm. Oh God, my arm. I know. Just breathe. Help is coming. 3 rows back, a call button chimed. The sound was quiet, almost polite, completely at odds with the violent chaos that had just erupted. But something about it made Veronica's head snap around, her expression shifting from righteous authority to something that looked almost like recognition, almost like dread. A man stood slowly from seat 6D. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a crisp pilot's uniform with 4 gold stripes on the sleeves that marked him as a captain. His dark skin was smooth, his posture military straight, his face absolutely expressionless. He hadn't spoken once during the entire flight, hadn't drawn any attention to himself, had simply sat reading a technical manual while chaos unfolded 3 rows ahead. Now he stood, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of calm that came from flying through storms and knowing that panic killed faster than turbulence. Ma'am, he said, looking directly at Veronica, you just assaulted my grandmother. The cabin went absolutely silent. Even Lillian's sobs caught in her throat, her head turning slowly, painfully, to see the man who'd spoken. Her eyes widened, Her lips formed a word that came out as barely a breath. Isaiah. I'm Captain Isaiah Crow, the man continued, his gaze never leaving Veronica's face. I fly the Boeing 787-9 Dreamliner, this aircraft model. I've logged 11,000 hours on this exact configuration. I trained half the pilots currently flying for this airline, including probably whoever is in that cockpit right now. He paused, letting the weight of his credentials settle over the cabin like a blanket. And you just committed felony assault at 35,000 feet while I watched. Veronica's face had gone from flushed red to pale gray. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. The businessman kneeling beside Lillian looked up at Isaiah with something like relief flooding his features. Captain, thank God. This woman needs immediate medical attention. Her arm is definitely broken. I think I saw bone. Isaiah moved forward with controlled purpose, each step measured and deliberate. He dropped to one knee beside his grandmother, his large hands hovering over her for just a moment before he gently, so gently, touched her good shoulder. Graham, he said softly, and the formal captain's voice cracked just slightly. I'm here. I've got you. You're going to be okay. Lillian's face crumpled again, but this time with relief mixing into the pain. I didn't do anything wrong. I promise, baby, I didn't do anything. I was just trying to go back to my seat, and she grabbed me, and I felt something snap, and… Shoo, I know. I saw everything. Isaiah looked up at Veronica, and his expression went cold again. Arctic. I saw you grab a 72-year-old woman. I saw you twist her arm behind her back with enough force to break bone. I saw you assault a passenger who posed absolutely no threat to anyone on this aircraft. She was non-compliant, Veronica managed, but her voice had lost its authority. She sounded defensive now, scared. She refused to remain seated when instructed. She was creating a disturbance. I used appropriate restraint techniques that I was trained to. You used nothing appropriate, Isaiah interrupted, his voice still quiet but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. You used excessive force against an elderly passenger. You caused serious bodily harm. And you did it while I sat 3 rows back documenting every single word you said and every action you took. He pulled out his phone, held it up so Veronica could see the screen. Video footage. Time-stamped. Crystal clear. I've been recording since the moment you started harassing my grandmother during boarding, Isaiah said. Every dismissive comment. Every time you skipped her during service. Every escalation. All of it. Around them, other passengers were pulling out their own phones, checking their own footage. The woman in 4B nodded vigorously. I've got it too. All of it. From when she grabbed her. A younger man in 5A held up his device. Same. I started recording when she raised her voice. Got the whole assault on video. Veronica looked around the cabin, seeing her narrative crumbling in real time, seeing the evidence multiplying, seeing passengers who'd been too intimidated to intervene now standing as witnesses to her violence. Her breathing quickened. Her eyes darted toward the cockpit door as if calculating whether she could reach it, whether she could control the story before it spiraled beyond her grasp. Isaiah stood, placing himself between Veronica and his grandmother. You're not going anywhere near her again. In fact, you're not going anywhere at all until we land and you're met by federal air marshals. You can't give me orders, Veronica said, but it came out weak, desperate. I'm crew. You're just a passenger on this flight. I'm a pilot with command authority who just witnessed a federal crime, Isaiah corrected. And in about 30 seconds, I'm going to that cockpit to inform the actual captain of this aircraft that his lead flight attendant just broke a passenger's arm and needs to be relieved of duty immediately. You can cooperate or you can resist and add to your charges. Your choice. Before we continue, I need you to do something right now. If watching an elderly woman get her arm broken for the crime of existing in first class makes you angry, prove it. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. Because what happens next when Isaiah reveals who he is will restore your faith in justice. Now let's continue. But before anyone could move, before Veronica could respond, the intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice filled the cabin, professional and measured, completely unaware of the catastrophe unfolding in first class. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Martinez. We've received a report of a disturbance in the forward cabin. I want to assure everyone that the situation is being handled by our experienced crew, and we will continue to our destination in Atlanta as scheduled. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We appreciate your patience and cooperation. Isaiah's jaw tightened. He turned toward the cockpit, but a hand caught his sleeve. Lillian, even through her agony, was gripping him with her good hand. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't make trouble. I just want to go home. I just want this to be over." The words hit Isaiah like a physical blow. His grandmother, broken and bleeding and terrified, was asking him not to pursue justice because she'd spent 72 years learning that making trouble meant making things worse, that speaking up meant retaliation, that even when you were the victim, you could somehow end up being treated like the criminal. He knelt beside her again, covering her trembling hand with his. "Graham, this isn't trouble. This is accountability. What she did to you was wrong. What she did to you was illegal. And I am not going to let her walk away from this." "But what if they don't believe me?" Lillian's voice cracked. "What if they say I caused it? What if they say I was difficult or confused or—" "They have video," Isaiah said firmly. "Multiple videos from multiple witnesses. They have my testimony as both a family member and as a captain who knows exactly what appropriate force looks like and what criminal assault looks like. They have your broken arm, which speaks for itself." He paused, his voice softening. "Graham, you taught me to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. That's what I'm doing." Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks again, but she nodded, just barely. Isaiah stood and walked toward the cockpit with purpose. Veronica tried to intercept him, stepping into his path with her arms crossed. "You cannot enter the flight deck without authorization," she said, grasping at procedure like a lifeline. "That's a federal regulation. You know that. And you cannot assault passengers," Isaiah replied evenly. "Also a federal regulation. Seems like we're both breaking new ground today." He reached past her and knocked on the cockpit door in the specific pattern that identified him as flight crew. After a moment, the door cracked open. A young first officer peered out, his expression confused, then shocked as he recognized Isaiah. "Captain Crow? Sir, I didn't know you were on this flight. Is everything—" His eyes traveled past Isaiah to the scene in first class, to Lillian clutching her twisted arm, to the passengers standing with phones out, to Veronica looking cornered and desperate. "What happened?" "Your lead flight attendant just broke a passenger's arm," Isaiah said clearly, loudly enough that his words carried through the open door to Captain Martinez beyond. "The passenger is my grandmother. She's 72 years old. She was not aggressive, not threatening, and not non-compliant. Multiple passengers have video evidence of the assault. I need you to divert this aircraft immediately and have law enforcement meet us at the gate." Captain Martinez appeared behind his first officer, a stocky man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who'd been flying since before automation made it easy. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. "Isaiah? Jesus Christ, is that really you?" He stepped into the cabin, his gaze moving from Isaiah to Lillian to Veronica. "Someone want to tell me what the hell is going on in my cabin?" Veronica launched into her version immediately, words tumbling out fast and defensive. "Captain, I had a passenger who refused to follow crew instructions. She was up and wandering during critical phases of flight, creating a disturbance, and when I attempted to guide her back to her seat, she became combative. I used minimal necessary force to ensure the safety of—" "That's a lie." The woman in 4B interrupted, standing again. I watched the whole thing. That elderly woman was trying to return to her seat after stretching her legs. Your flight attendant grabbed her arm and twisted it so hard I heard it snap from 3 rows away. There was nothing minimal about it. I have video, the man in 5A added, holding up his phone. Clear footage. She assaulted that woman without provocation. Captain Martinez looked at Isaiah, and something passed between them. The recognition of one professional to another. The understanding that came from years of making life-or-death decisions in aluminum tubes hurtling through the sky. The knowledge that truth mattered more than convenience. How bad is the injury? Martinez asked quietly. Displaced fracture from what I can see, Isaiah replied. Possibly compound. She needs immediate medical attention. Martinez nodded once, then turned to Veronica. You're relieved of duty. Go to the aft galley and remain there until we land. Do not interact with any passengers. Do not use any communication devices. Is that clear? Veronica's face flushed red again, fury replacing fear. You can't do that. You weren't here. You didn't see what happened. You're taking the word of passengers over your own crew. I'm taking the word of a captain I've known for 15 years, multiple passenger witnesses, and video evidence over the word of someone I just watched try to lie to my face, Martinez said coldly. Aft galley. Now, or I will have you physically escorted and add insubordination to whatever charges are about to come your way. For a moment, Veronica looked like she might argue further. Her hands clenched into fists. Her jaw worked silently. But then she spun on her heel and stalked toward the back of the aircraft, her shoulders rigid with barely contained rage. Martinez turned to his first officer. Get on the radio. Contact Atlanta operations and tell them we need medical personnel, airport police, and federal air marshals at the gate.
Priority handling.
He looked at the passengers still standing. I need statements from anyone who witnessed what happened, and I need those videos preserved and made available to investigators. Multiple hands went up. The businessman kneeling beside Lillian spoke up. Captain, I'm Dr. Robert Chun. Emergency medicine. This woman needs pain management and her arm needs to be immobilized before we move her. Do you have a medical kit? Forward galley, upper compartment, Martinez said immediately. Take whatever you need. Dr. Chun moved quickly, another passenger helping him retrieve the large red medical case. He returned to Lillian's side and opened it, pulling out supplies with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Crow, I'm going to give you something for the pain. Okay? Then we'll stabilize your arm so it doesn't get worse before we can get you to a hospital. His voice was gentle, professional, completely focused on her care rather than the drama swirling around them. Lillian nodded, tears still streaming but her breathing slightly steadier now that people were helping instead of hurting. Dr. Chun administered morphine from a preloaded syringe, then so carefully, began creating a makeshift splint from the rigid materials in the medical kit. Isaiah crouched beside them, one hand resting lightly on his grandmother's shoulder, offering comfort without interfering with the doctor's work. He watched every movement, his expression tight with controlled emotion. I'm sorry, Graham, he said quietly. I'm so sorry I didn't step in sooner. I was trying to document everything, to make sure we had evidence, but I should have. You did exactly right, Lillian interrupted. Her voice slurred slightly from the morphine but firm with conviction. You got proof. That matters more than stopping it 30 seconds earlier. You made sure she can't lie her way out of this. She shouldn't have been able to do it in the first place, Isaiah said, and there was something dark in his tone. Something that spoke of years of watching people like his grandmother be diminished and dismissed and harmed by people in positions of petty authority who faced no consequences. Captain Martinez was giving instructions to his first officer, coordinating the diversion and emergency response. Then he turned back to Isaiah. I need to know everything, he said. From the beginning. What led to this? Isaiah pulled out his phone and began scrolling through the video he'd recorded, but he didn't need the footage to remember. Every moment was burned into his memory with crystalline clarity. "It started during boarding," he said, his voice taking on the measured cadence of someone giving official testimony. "My grandmother was assigned seat 2A, first class. She has arthritis and moves slowly, but she was polite and following all instructions. Veronica, your lead attendant, immediately singled her out. He found the first clip and held up the phone so Martinez could see. The footage showed Lillian approaching the first-class cabin, moving carefully with one hand on the seatbacks for balance. Veronica appeared in frame, her expression shifting from neutral to something harder as she took in Lillian's appearance. On the video, Veronica's voice was sharp and loud. "Boarding pass and ID." Lillian fumbled in her purse, pulling out the documents with slightly shaking hands. "Here you go, ma'am." Veronica examined them with exaggerated thoroughness, holding them up to the light, comparing Lillian's face to her ID multiple times. "This is first class. Are you sure you're in the right section?" "Yes, ma'am. Seat 2A. My grandson purchased the ticket for me as a gift." Lillian's voice on the recording was soft, almost apologetic, as if she needed to justify her presence in a space she'd paid to occupy. Veronica had studied the boarding pass for several more seconds, long enough that the line behind Lillian began to back up. Other passengers shifted impatiently. Finally, she'd handed the documents back with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Overhead bin space is limited in first class. You'll need to check that bag." "Oh, but it's small. I thought carry-on was." "I said you need to check it." Veronica's tone left no room for discussion. "Gate-checked bags can be picked up at baggage claim in Atlanta." Lillian had nodded quickly, surrendering her small rolling suitcase to a gate agent who'd appeared at Veronica's sharp gesture. Isaiah's video captured the way his grandmother's shoulders had hunched slightly, the way she'd clutched her purse tighter, the way she tried to make herself smaller. Captain Martinez watched the footage with his jaw clenched. "She didn't ask anyone else to gate check." "No," Isaiah confirmed. "She didn't. I counted 7 other first-class passengers who boarded after my grandmother. 3 had bags larger than hers. None were asked to check anything." He scrolled forward to the next clip. This one showed beverage service, about 40 minutes into the flight. Veronica moved down the aisle with a cart, smiling at passengers, taking orders, making small talk. She reached row 1, served both passengers. Moved to row 2, served the man in 2B. Then deliberately, obviously, skipped Lillian in 2A and continued to row 3. On the video, Lillian had waited quietly for several minutes. Then she'd raised her hand tentatively. "Excuse me, miss?" Veronica had turned around, her expression annoyed. "Yes. I'm sorry to trouble you, but I didn't get a chance to order a beverage. Service is in progress. You'll have to wait your turn." "But you just passed my row." "I said wait your turn." Veronica had snapped the words, then continued down the aisle, leaving Lillian sitting there with confusion and hurt written across her face. Martinez exhaled slowly through his nose. "How long did she wait?" 37 minutes, Isaiah said flatly. "I timed it." Veronica completed service for the entire first-class cabin, returned the cart to the galley, and disappeared for 10 minutes. When she finally came back, she brought my grandmother a small cup of water. No ice, no choice of beverage. No epaleji. The video showed exactly that. Veronica approaching with a plastic cup, not even the glassware she'd served everyone else with, and placing it on Lillian's tray table without a word before walking away.
Jesus, Doutor Shen Mutered.
He'd finished splinting Lillian's arm and was now sitting on the floor beside her, monitoring her vital signs. This was systematic harassment. "It gets worse," Isaiah said grimly. He scrolled to another clip, this one stamped with a timestamp from 90 minutes into the flight. Meal service. Same pattern. Everyone else got full service, full choices, warm bread, the whole first-class experience. My grandmother got skipped entirely. When she asked about it, Veronica told her the chicken option was sold out, and they didn't have anything suitable for her dietary needs. Did your grandmother specify dietary restrictions? Martinez asked.
No.
Veronica never asked. She just assumed and decided my grandmother didn't deserve a meal. The footage showed Lillian sitting quietly, watching other passengers eat, her hands folded in her lap. A younger passenger in 3B had actually offered to share her meal. Lillian had declined with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, thanking the woman but saying she was fine. She wasn't very hungry anyway. It wasn't a problem. Isaiah's voice was tight when he spoke again. My grandmother hasn't eaten since 6 this morning. She's diabetic. She takes medication that requires food. She was getting lightheaded, but she didn't complain because she spent her entire life learning not to make waves, not to cause problems, not to give people reasons to label her as difficult. Lillian made a small sound, somewhere between a sob and a laugh. Baby, you don't need to tell them all that. Yes, I do, Isaiah said gently. Because context matters. Because your dignity matters. Because the FAA and the FBI need to understand exactly what happened here and why. He turned back to Martinez. About 20 minutes ago, my grandmother stood up to stretch. She has arthritis in both knees. Sitting for extended periods causes pain and stiffness. She'd been in her seat for over 3 hours. She stood up, stretched, took maybe 5 steps down the aisle, then turned to come back. That's when Veronica appeared. The next video clip was the one that made everyone watching flinch. Veronica approaching Lillian with purposeful strides, her face set in an expression of righteous authority. Lillian turning, startled, her hand going to her chest in surprise. You need to return to your seat immediately. Veronica's recorded voice was sharp and loud, pitched to carry through the cabin, to draw attention, to humiliate. I am returning to my seat. I was just stretching my legs. You're creating a disturbance. Passengers have complained about you wandering the aisles. Lillian had looked around, confused and hurt. Who complained? I wasn't bothering anyone. That's not for you to determine. Return to your seat now or I will have you restrained. I'm going to my seat. Please, I'm just trying to. That's when Veronica had grabbed her. The video captured it with brutal clarity. Veronica's hand clamping around Lillian's right wrist. Lillian's instinctive pull backward, trying to free herself from the painful grip. Veronica using that momentum to yank Lillian's arm up and behind her back in a move that was textbook excessive force. The sound of the break was audible on the recording. A wet crack that made several people in the cabin gasp even watching it for the second or third time. Lillian's scream, her body going limp. The crash as she fell into the aisle divider. And through it all, Veronica's voice. Stop resisting. Stop fighting me. But Lillian hadn't been resisting. The video proved it. She'd been trying to protect herself from pain, from injury, from an attack she hadn't seen coming and didn't understand. Martinez's face had gone pale. She had no cause. No justification. That's assault. Clear, unambiguous assault. Yes, Isaiah agreed. And it was building to this from the moment my grandmother stepped on this aircraft. Veronica decided who belonged in first class and who didn't. She decided who deserved service and who deserved humiliation. And when my grandmother had the audacity to exist in a space Veronica felt she shouldn't occupy, when she had the nerve to make simple requests that every other passenger made without consequence, Veronica escalated until she found an excuse to hurt her. The cabin had gone absolutely silent. Even passengers in economy had become aware that something significant was happening, craning their necks to see, whispering to each other, some recording this new phase of the unfolding drama. A flight attendant from economy appeared, a young woman who looked stricken. Captain Martinez, I just heard what happened. Is there anything I can do to help? Take over first-class service, Martinez said. And I need you to make an announcement. Let everyone know we're diverting to Albuquerque due to a medical emergency and a security incident. Estimated time to landing is 42 minutes. Keep everyone calm. She nodded and moved to the PA system. Her voice, when it came through the speakers, was professional but carried an undercurrent of shock. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Sarah from your cabin crew. We want to inform you that we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is due to a medical emergency involving a passenger who requires immediate hospital care. We will be met by medical personnel and airport authorities. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We apologize for any inconvenience and appreciate your understanding during this situation. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Passengers who'd been absorbed in movies or work or sleep were suddenly alert, exchanging glances, pulling out phones to text loved ones about the delay. In the aft galley, Veronica sat on the jump seat, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, her face a mask of rigid fury. Another flight attendant, an older man named Marcus who'd worked with her for years, stood nearby looking uncomfortable. "This is insane," Veronica hissed to him. "I'm being treated like a criminal for doing my job." That woman was non-compliant. She was creating problems from the moment she boarded. "I used appropriate restraint techniques exactly as I was trained." Marcus said nothing. He'd seen the video that was already circulating among the crew via encrypted messages. He'd watched Veronica grab an elderly woman who was simply trying to return to her seat. He'd heard the bone break. He'd seen the look on Veronica's face. Not fear or accident or regret, but satisfaction. He'd worked with Veronica long enough to know this wasn't the first time she'd targeted passengers she deemed unworthy of first-class service. He'd seen her give preferential treatment to young, attractive passengers while barely acknowledging older ones. He'd watched her light up for businessmen while brushing off women traveling alone. He'd noticed the pattern of who got extra snacks and who got forgotten during service rounds. But he'd never said anything, never reported it. Because Veronica was senior, well-connected, and had a reputation for making life miserable for anyone who crossed her. Because airline culture protected seniority over passengers. Because it was easier to look away than to stand up. Now someone had been hurt, badly, and Marcus was going to have to live with the knowledge that he'd enabled this through his silence. Back in first class, Dr. Chan was taking Lillian's blood pressure and checking her pupils. "She's stable for now, but that morphine is going to wear off before we land. I can give her another dose, but I'd rather wait until we're closer to the ground in case there are any adverse reactions." "How's her arm?" Isaiah asked. "The splint is holding. I don't think there's arterial damage, which is the main concern with this type of fracture. But she needs X-rays and possibly surgery depending on the displacement. The sooner we get her to a hospital, the better." Lillian's eyes were drooping, the morphine and shock and exhaustion pulling her towards sleep. "Isaiah, baby, you should sit down. You have to be in Atlanta tomorrow for your ceremony. You worked so hard for this promotion." "The ceremony doesn't matter, Graham," Isaiah said, his voice rough with emotion. "Nothing matters except making sure you're okay and making sure the person who did this faces consequences. But you've been waiting 2 years for this. First Black regional chief pilot in the airline's history. That's important. That's bigger than—" "Nothing is bigger than you," Isaiah interrupted firmly. "Nothing. You raised me by yourself after Mom and Dad died. You worked 2 jobs so I could stay in school. You sold your car to help pay for flight training. You sat in every gallery during every check ride, every promotion, every milestone. You are the reason I'm a pilot. You are the reason I'm anything. So no, Graham, I'm not leaving your side for a ceremony. They can reschedule or they can do it without me." Tears slipped down Lillian's face again, but these were different, softer, the kind that came from being seen and valued and protected after a lifetime of being overlooked. Captain Martinez cleared his throat, clearly moved. "Isaiah, when we land, you're going to need to give a statement to the FBI. Air marshals will take custody of Veronica. Your grandmother will be transported to University of New Mexico Hospital. They have an excellent orthopedic trauma unit. I'll make sure she's not alone. I'm going with her, Isaiah said, leaving no room for argument. Of course, but you should know that this is going to be a major incident. Media will probably get wind of it. Corporate will be scrambling. There will be lawyers and investigators and a lot of people trying to control the narrative. Martinez paused. You have a spotless record. 11,000 flight hours without a single incident. Commendations from passengers and crew. You're about to become chief pilot. This situation could get complicated for you professionally if it's not handled right. Isaiah's expression hardened. Are you suggesting I should downplay what happened to protect my career? No, Martinez said quickly.
Hell no.
I'm suggesting you get a lawyer before you talk to anyone from corporate. I'm suggesting you document everything and keep copies somewhere they can't be disappeared. I'm suggesting you remember that airlines care about liability first and justice second. He lowered his voice. I'm suggesting you be careful, because I've seen good people get crushed by the machine when they try to do the right thing. The warning hung in the air, heavy with implications. Isaiah nodded slowly, understanding the reality Martinez was describing. The airline would want this contained, minimized, settled quietly. They would offer money in exchange for silence. They would suggest that making a big deal out of this would damage Isaiah's career prospects, would make him seem difficult, would mark him as someone who couldn't be trusted to prioritize company interests. They would do everything possible to make this go away without admitting fault, without changing policies, without holding anyone systemically accountable. I appreciate the advice, Isaiah said, but I'm not interested in protecting the airline's reputation. I'm interested in making sure this never happens to anyone else's grandmother. Martinez smiled grimly. I figured you'd say that. For what it's worth, you have my full support. And my testimony. I saw that video. There's no defending what she did. The 42 minutes to Albuquerque felt simultaneously endless and far too short. Dr. Chun monitored Lillian carefully, adjusting her position to minimize stress on the broken arm, checking her circulation, keeping up a gentle stream of conversation to assess her cognitive status. Other first-class passengers had settled into a strange quiet, processing what they'd witnessed, some still recording on their phones, others texting furiously to contacts about the unfolding situation. The woman in 4B approached Isaiah hesitantly. Captain Crow?
I'm Jennifer Walsh.
I'm an attorney. Civil rights litigation. If your grandmother needs representation, I'd like to offer my services pro bono. What happened to her was unconscionable. Thank you, Isaiah said, accepting her business card. I'll definitely be in touch. A man from 6C came forward next.
I'm Marcus Thompson.
I'm a journalist with the Associated Press. I know this is a terrible time, but this story needs to be told. Airlines have been getting away with discrimination and abuse for too long. If you're willing to go on record, I can make sure this doesn't get buried. Isaiah took that card too. Then another from a passenger who worked for the NAACP. Another from someone who ran a passenger rights advocacy group. Another from a civil rights professor at Stanford who happened to be on the flight. By the time they began their descent into Albuquerque, Isaiah had a stack of business cards and the beginning of a coalition. People who'd witnessed injustice and weren't willing to look away. People who had resources and platforms and the determination to use them. The landing was smooth. Captain Martinez brought the aircraft down with practiced precision, touching the runway so gently that passengers barely felt the contact. As they taxied toward the gate, emergency vehicles were already visible through the windows. Ambulances, airport police, unmarked vehicles that probably belonged to federal agents. The seatbelt sign went off and Martinez made one final announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during this situation. We've arrived in Albuquerque where medical personnel are standing by. I need all passengers to remain seated while we handle the medical emergency and the related security matter. This is not optional. Anyone who interferes with the deplaning process or attempts to leave the aircraft before being cleared will face federal charges. Is that understood? A murmur of assent rippled through the cabin. The aircraft door opened and paramedics boarded immediately, moving toward first class with a stretcher and equipment. They conferred quickly with Dr. Chun, who gave them a concise rundown of Lillian's injuries and the treatment he'd provided. Within minutes, they had Lillian secured on the stretcher, her arm immobilized more professionally than the makeshift splint had allowed, and 4 started to provide continued pain management and fluids. "Sir, are you family?" One of the paramedics asked Isaiah. "I'm her grandson. I'm going with her." "Of course. We're taking her to UNM Hospital Trauma Center, about 15 minutes from here." Behind the paramedics came 4 federal air marshals in plain clothes but with badges visible. They moved directly to the aft galley where Veronica waited. Isaiah couldn't see exactly what happened, but he heard Veronica's voice rise in protest, heard the firm professional tones of the marshals reading her rights, heard the metallic click of handcuffs. She was walked through the cabin in restraints, her face bright red with humiliation and rage. As she passed Lillian's row, she opened her mouth as if to say something, but one of the marshals put a hand on her shoulder and guided her forward without a word. Every passenger watched her go. Some recorded it. Some simply stared with expressions of grim satisfaction. Justice wasn't always swift, but sometimes it was visible. If we had your attention up to this point and you feel that rush of satisfaction watching Veronica's face fall, smash that like button right now. Tell us where in the world you are watching this. If you're yet to subscribe, you can do that now so you won't miss our next story. Now let's 5 back in. FBI agents boarded next, professional and efficient. They spoke first with Captain Martinez, then with Isaiah, then began systematically taking statements from witnesses. The woman in 4B eagerly shared her video. The man in 5A did the same. Dr. Chun provided medical documentation of Lillian's injuries. The businessman in 2C described exactly what he'd observed. One agent, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, pulled Isaiah aside while the paramedics prepared to transport Lillian. "Captain Crow, I'm Special Agent Reyes. I've reviewed the preliminary video evidence and spoken with Captain Martinez. I want you to know we're taking this extremely seriously. Assault on an aircraft is a federal offense. Assault against an elderly victim with bodily harm elevates the charges significantly. Based on what I've seen, Ms. Hale is looking at multiple felonies." "Good," Isaiah said bluntly. "What happens now? We'll complete our investigation, interview all witnesses, review all video and audio evidence, examine the aircraft for any relevant physical evidence. We'll coordinate with local prosecutors. Ms. Hale will have an initial appearance before a federal magistrate within 48 hours. Given the severity of the charges and the clear video evidence, I expect she'll be held without bail." "And the airline? What about their liability?" Agent Reyes's expression was carefully neutral. "That's a civil matter, not criminal. But I will say that the FAA will be conducting their own investigation into the airline's crew training, oversight, and whether there's a pattern of similar incidents that weren't properly reported. If you or your grandmother choose to pursue civil action, the evidence we collect will be available through proper channels." Isaiah nodded. "My grandmother is 72 years old. She's never been in trouble in her life. She was traveling to watch me get promoted. She did nothing to deserve this." "I know," Reyes said quietly, "and I'm sorry this happened to her. But I promise you we will build the strongest case possible. Ms. Hale will face the consequences of her actions." The paramedics were ready to move. Isaiah followed them off the aircraft and into the ambulance, climbing in beside his grandmother's stretcher. She was more alert now, her eyes tracking movement, her good hand reaching for his. "This is too much fuss," she murmured.
I'm okay.
"Just a broken arm. People break bones all the time. People break bones in accidents, Graham. Not from being assaulted by someone who's supposed to keep them safe." Isaiah squeezed her hand gently. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to receive care. You're allowed to matter. The ambulance doors closed and they pulled away from the aircraft, sirens silent but lights flashing. Through the small window, Isaiah could see the plane still sitting at the gate, passengers still being interviewed, the investigation still unfolding. His phone buzzed. A text from Captain Martinez. Corporate just called. They want to speak with you ASAP. Tread carefully. Then another text, this one from a number he didn't recognize. Captain Crow, this is Amanda Price, VP of Communications for the airline. We need to discuss this situation before it becomes a media circus. Please call me as soon as possible. Isaiah turned his phone face down and focused on his grandmother. The corporate vultures could wait. At University of New Mexico Hospital, Lillian was fast-tracked to radiology. The X-rays confirmed what Dr. Chan had suspected. A displaced fracture of the radius and ulna, both bones of the forearm broken clean through. The orthopedic surgeon who reviewed the images, Dr. Sarah Okafor, shook her head in disbelief. This is the kind of fracture we see in car accidents or falls from height, she said. The force required to break both bones like this is substantial. You said this happened from someone grabbing her arm. Grabbing and twisting, Isaiah confirmed. There's video. Dr. Okafor's expression darkened. I'll need to document this as a non-accidental injury. The force pattern is consistent with assault. I'll be including that in my medical report, and I'm legally required to report this to Adult Protective Services. The FBI is already investigating, Isaiah said. The person who did this is in federal custody. Good, but I still have to file my own report. This is elder abuse, and in my 15 years of orthopedic surgery, I've seen my share of accidents that weren't accidents. This one is textbook intentional harm. She turned to Lillian with a gentler expression. Mrs. Crow, I'm going to recommend surgery. We need to realign the bones and stabilize them with plates and screws. Without surgical intervention, these fractures won't heal properly and you'll lose significant function in that arm. Lillian's eyes widened. Surgery? How much will that cost? I have Medicare, but I don't know if... Don't worry about cost right now, Dr. Okafor interrupted kindly. We'll figure out the financial side. Right now I'm concerned with making sure you get the treatment you need. The surgery itself will take about 2 hours. You'll be under general anesthesia. Recovery will take several months, and you'll need physical therapy, but if we do this right, you should regain full function. Several months. Lillian looked distressed. But I have work. I clean offices 3 nights a week. I can't afford to take months off. Isaiah felt something crack inside his chest. His grandmother was 72 years old, had worked her entire life, had raised him alone on poverty wages, and was still working 3 nights a week cleaning offices because Social Security wasn't enough to live on. And now she was worried about losing that income because someone had broken her arm for the crime of existing in first class. Graham, you're not going back to cleaning offices, he said firmly. Not now, not ever. I make enough to support both of us. I've been trying to get you to retire for 3 years. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden. You're my grandmother. You're the woman who raised me. Let me take care of you the way you took care of me. He turned to Dr. Okafor. Schedule the surgery. Whatever she needs, we'll make it work. Dr. Okafor nodded. I have an opening tomorrow morning at 7. I'd like to do this sooner rather than later. The longer we wait, the more difficult the repair becomes and the higher the risk of complications. They admitted Lillian overnight for pre-surgical observation. Isaiah stayed with her, pulling a chair close to her hospital bed, ignoring the messages that continued flooding his phone. Corporate executives wanting to talk, journalists requesting interviews, colleagues asking if the rumors were true, friends offering support. He responded to only one message from his Aunt Patricia in Atlanta. He called her directly, explained what had happened, listened to her fury and tears, promised to keep her updated, and asked her to contact the airline about rescheduling his promotion ceremony. Reschedule? Patricia's voice was sharp. Baby, after what they let happen to your grandmother, you still want that promotion? You still want to work for people who employ someone like that flight attendant? It was a good question. Isaiah looked at his grandmother sleeping fitfully in the hospital bed, her broken arm elevated and wrapped in temporary splinting, her face showing every one of her 72 years plus the weight of this fresh trauma. I don't know, he admitted. Right now, I just want her to be okay. Everything else can wait. That night, while Lillian slept under sedation and pain medication, Isaiah sat in the hospital room and did what he'd been trained to do in crisis situations. He gathered data, analyzed options, and developed a response plan. He downloaded all the video he'd recorded to 3 separate cloud storage services. He sent copies to his personal email, to a lawyer friend, and to an encrypted hard drive he kept for important documents. He made sure nothing could be lost or deleted or conveniently disappeared. He documented a timeline of events, noting every instance of discrimination he'd witnessed, every moment of escalation, every failure of oversight that had allowed Veronica to target his grandmother without intervention. He researched federal statutes on assault aboard aircraft, on elder abuse, on civil rights violations. He read case law about airline liability for crew misconduct. He studied precedents for damage awards in similar cases. And he made a decision. He wasn't going to let this be quietly settled. He wasn't going to accept a check and a confidentiality agreement. He wasn't going to allow the airline to frame this as an isolated incident involving one bad employee. Because Veronica hadn't acted in a vacuum. She'd been employed by the airline for 23 years. She'd had the authority to assault a passenger because the airline had given her that authority without adequate oversight, without sufficient training on use of force, without consequences for discrimination that multiple people had almost certainly witnessed over 2 decades. The system had failed. And Isaiah was going to make sure the system was held accountable. At 6:30 the next morning, Dr. Okafor arrived to take Lillian to surgery. She was groggy from pre-op medication, calmer than she'd been the previous day, almost serene. You look like your grandfather, she told Isaiah dreamily. He was a pilot too, Tuskegee Airman. Did I ever tell you that? You've told me 100 times, Graham, Isaiah said with a smile, and I never get tired of hearing it. He would be so proud of you, so proud. Her eyes drifted closed, then opened again with effort. Isaiah, baby, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let this make you angry. Don't let it make you bitter. That woman who hurt me, she's already living in a prison of her own hate. Don't join her there. Isaiah felt his throat tighten. Even now, even after everything, his grandmother was worried about him rather than herself. Worried about protecting his soul rather than seeking revenge. I promise I won't let it make me bitter, he said carefully. But I'm not going to let it go either. There's a difference between forgiveness and accountability. Lillian smiled faintly. You always were smarter than me. I learned from the best. They wheeled her away and Isaiah settled in to wait. 2 hours, Dr. Okafor had said. 2 hours to repair what Veronica had broken in 2 seconds. He used the time to finally start returning calls. The first one was to Jennifer Walsh, the civil rights attorney from the plane. Captain Crow, she answered immediately. How's your grandmother? In surgery. They're repairing the fracture now. He paused. You offered to represent her. Does that offer still stand? Absolutely. I've already started preliminary research. This case has strong merit on multiple grounds. Federal assault charges against the flight attendant. Civil rights violations. Negligent hiring and supervision by the airline. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. We could also potentially bring claims under the Air Carrier Access Act if we can establish a pattern of discrimination against elderly or minority passengers. There's a pattern, Isaiah said quietly. I've been asking around, talking to other flight attendants who've worked with Veronica. She's been reported at least a dozen times over the years for discriminatory behavior. Complaints were filed. Nothing ever happened. The airline kept putting her on flights, kept giving her authority over vulnerable passengers, kept ignoring the warnings. Jennifer's voice sharpened with interest. Do you have documentation of those complaints? Not yet, but I know people who do. Flight attendants who kept copies because they didn't trust the airline to maintain records. Passengers who submitted written complaints and never heard back. Union reps who tried to get her disciplined and were shut down by management. That's gold, Jennifer said bluntly. That transforms this from an isolated incident into systemic negligence. It shows the airline had notice of the danger Veronica posed and chose to ignore it. That opens them up to punitive damages, not just compensatory. I don't care about the money, Isaiah said. I mean, I want my grandmother's medical bills covered and I want her compensated for what she went through. But what I really want is change. Real change. Policy reforms. Oversight. Consequences for discrimination that go beyond firing one person after they've already hurt someone. We can demand all of that, Jennifer assured him. Settlement negotiations can include non-monetary terms, required training programs, independent oversight committees, public reporting of discrimination complaints, regular audits. We can build systemic accountability into the resolution. They talked for another 30 minutes, with Jennifer taking detailed notes and explaining the legal process ahead. By the time they finished, Isaiah felt like he had a genuine partner in this fight. Someone who understood that justice was about more than individual punishment or financial compensation. His next call was to Marcus Thompson, the AP journalist. I want to tell my grandmother's story, Isaiah said without preamble. I want people to know what happened and why it matters. Can you help with that? I can absolutely help with that, Marcus said. And Isaiah could hear the sound of typing in the background. I've already started writing based on what I witnessed, but I'd like to do a full interview with you and ideally with your grandmother once she's recovered enough. We're talking front page, national coverage. This story has everything. Civil rights, corporate negligence, systemic discrimination, a grandson who's a decorated pilot standing up for his grandmother. It's powerful. It's not about me being a pilot, Isaiah objected. It's about my grandmother being assaulted for the crime of being black and elderly in first class. It's about both, Marcus corrected gently. Your credentials matter because they make it harder for the airline to dismiss this or discredit you. They matter because you're someone who understands airline operations and can speak authoritatively about how badly Veronica violated protocol. And they matter because the contrast is stark. You, a black captain about to become chief pilot, watching your black grandmother be brutalized by a system that should have protected her. That narrative is compelling and it's true. Isaiah had to concede the point. His professional standing did give him a platform that most victims of airline abuse didn't have. He could leverage that platform to force changes that would protect people who didn't have his resources or visibility. All right, he agreed. Let's tell the story. Dr. Okafor emerged from surgery at 9:15, still in her scrubs, looking satisfied. The repair went well. Both bones are now aligned and stabilized with titanium plates and screws. She tolerated the anesthesia without complications. She'll be groggy for a few hours, but she should make a full recovery with proper physical therapy. Isaiah felt tension he hadn't realized he was carrying drain from his shoulders. When can I see her? She's in recovery now. Give her another 30 minutes to wake up a bit more. Then you can sit with her. Those 30 minutes felt longer than the entire surgery. Isaiah paced the waiting room, checking his phone obsessively, reading and rereading messages he'd already processed. Then a nurse appeared and led him back to the recovery area. Lillian was awake but drowsy, her right arm now properly casted from knuckles to elbow in bright white fiberglass. She smiled weakly when she saw him. Hey, baby, did I miss anything exciting? Isaiah laughed, the sound coming out shakier than he intended. Just you getting robot parts installed. You're officially a cyborg now, Graham. Does that mean I get superpowers? Absolutely. You can now punch through walls and lift cars. Doctor's orders. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, just being present with each other. Then Lillian spoke quietly. I've been thinking about what happened, about that woman, Veronica. I keep trying to understand why she hated me so much. I never did anything to her. I was polite. I followed all the rules. I just existed. And somehow that was enough to make her want to hurt me. It wasn't about you, Graham, Isaiah said gently. It was never about you. It was about her believing that certain people don't belong in certain spaces. It was about her feeling entitled to police who gets dignity and who gets degradation based on nothing but her own prejudices. But why? What did I ever do to people like her to make them think I'm less than? The question was one Isaiah had been grappling with his entire life. Why did walking into a cockpit in his captain's uniform still sometimes generate surprised looks? Why did passengers occasionally ask if he was really qualified to fly? Why did his grandmother, a woman who'd never hurt anyone, who'd spent her life working and giving and loving, get treated like she didn't deserve basic human decency? You didn't do anything, he said firmly. This isn't about anything you did or didn't do. It's about a society that's still struggling with the idea that black people, elderly people, women, anyone who doesn't fit a narrow definition of who belongs in positions of privilege, have just as much right to those spaces as anyone else. Veronica absorbed those beliefs somewhere along the way, and she used her position of authority to enforce them. It hurts, Lillian whispered. Even knowing it's not rational, even knowing it says more about her than about me, it still hurts to be hated for no reason. I know. I'm sorry you had to experience that. And I'm sorrier that it's not the first time and probably won't be the last. But Graham, this time is going to be different. This time there are consequences. This time the story doesn't end with you swallowing your pain and moving on because you're afraid of making trouble. Over the next 3 days, while Lillian recovered in the hospital, the story exploded across national media. Marcus Thompson's article for the Associated Press ran under the headline, Elderly Black Woman's Arm Broken by Flight Attendant in First Class. Her grandson, a pilot, captured everything on video. The article was detailed, unflinching, and accompanied by still images from the video that Isaiah had authorized for publication. The image of Veronica's hand clamped around Lillian's wrist. The moment of the break, Lillian's face contorted in agony. Veronica standing over her with that expression of righteous authority. The story went viral within hours. It was picked up by every major news outlet. Cable news ran segments analyzing the video frame by frame. Social media erupted with outrage and demands for accountability. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Justice for Lillian. Hashtag First Class While Black. Hashtag Airline Accountability. Celebrities with large platforms shared the story. Civil rights organizations issued statements. Lawmakers called for congressional hearings on discrimination in air travel. The NAACP announced they were filing a formal complaint with the FAA and the Department of Transportation. The airline's initial response was a carefully worded statement expressing concern and promising a thorough investigation. It was corporate language designed to sound sympathetic while admitting nothing and promising nothing concrete. The public response to that statement was savage. People flooded the airline's social media with the video, with demands for immediate action, with threats to boycott. Within 12 hours, the airline's stock price had dropped 4%. Sponsors began quietly distancing themselves. Pilots' unions issued statements condemning the assault and calling for policy reforms. The airline tried again with a second statement, this one announcing that Veronica Hale had been terminated and would never work in the aviation industry again. They offered thoughts and prayers for Lillian's recovery and reiterated their commitment to safety and dignity for all passengers. It still wasn't enough, because people wanted more than one person fired. They wanted to know why Veronica had been allowed to abuse passengers for 23 years. They wanted to know what the airline was going to do differently. They wanted systemic change, not performative damage control. On the fourth day, while Lillian was being discharged from the hospital with a prescription for pain medication and a schedule for physical therapy, the airline's CEO held a press conference. Isaiah watched it on his phone from Lillian's hospital room. The CEO, a polished white man in his 60s named Robert Brennan, stood before a podium with the airline's logo prominently displayed behind him. He looked somber and rehearsed. "I want to begin by expressing my deepest apologies to Mrs. Lillian Crow and her family for the completely unacceptable treatment she received aboard one of our flights. What happened to Mrs. Crow was wrong. It was a violation of everything we stand for as an airline and as a company. The employee responsible has been terminated, and we are cooperating fully with federal authorities in their criminal investigation." He paused, as if expecting that to be sufficient. When reporters immediately began shouting questions, he held up a hand. "I also want to announce a series of immediate actions we're taking to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. First, we are conducting a comprehensive review of all passenger complaints filed in the past 5 years, with particular attention to allegations of discrimination. Second, we are implementing mandatory bias training for all flight crew, with annual recertification required. Third, we are establishing an independent passenger advocacy office with authority to investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary action. Fourth, we are revising our use of force policies to require that physical contact with passengers be used only when there is an immediate safety threat, and all such incidents must be reviewed by management within 24 hours. The reporters erupted with questions. Brennan pointed to one. "Mr. Brennan, multiple sources indicate that Veronica Hale had at least a dozen complaints filed against her over her 23-year career. Why wasn't she disciplined or fired before she had the chance to seriously injure a passenger?" Brennan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We're conducting a thorough review of how those complaints were handled. If we find that appropriate action was not taken, there will be accountability for those failures." Another reporter: "Will you be offering compensation to Mrs. Crow?" "We have reached out to Mrs. Crow's family to discuss how we can support her recovery. Those conversations are ongoing and I won't discuss details publicly, but I can say that we are committed to doing right by her." Another: "Captain Isaiah Crow was set to be promoted to regional chief pilot before this incident. Will that promotion still move forward?" Brennan hesitated for just a fraction of a second, long enough for Isaiah to understand exactly what was happening. The airline wanted him to be quiet, to accept their settlement, to go away, and they were willing to hold his career hostage to make that happen. "Captain Crow is a valued member of our flight operations team," Brennan said carefully. "Personnel decisions are made based on a variety of factors and are confidential. We have tremendous respect for Captain Crow's service to this airline." It wasn't a yes. It wasn't a no. It was a message. Play ball or pay the price. Isaiah felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He'd known this was coming, had been warned by Captain Martinez, had understood intellectually how the game was played. But seeing it happen in real time, watching a CEO publicly hint that standing up for his assaulted grandmother might cost him the promotion he'd earned, the position he'd worked toward for years, that made it real. Lillian was watching the press conference too, her expression troubled. "Baby, you don't have to do this. You don't have to fight them for me. That promotion, that's your dream. I don't want you to lose it because of me." "I'm not losing anything because of you," Isaiah said firmly. "If I don't get that promotion, it'll be because I refuse to stay silent about a woman being brutalized on their aircraft. It'll be because I chose integrity over ambition. And Graham, you raised me better than to make any other choice." Lillian's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so proud of you. Your grandfather would be so proud. But I'm also scared. I've seen what happens to people who fight back against powerful institutions. They get crushed. They get labeled as troublemakers. They lose everything." "Maybe," Isaiah acknowledged, "or maybe this time is different. Maybe this time there's enough public attention, enough video evidence, enough outrage that they can't just bury it. Maybe this time we actually win. And if you don't, if they take that promotion away, if they make it hard for you to get hired anywhere else, if fighting this costs you everything you've worked for. Isaiah thought about it seriously because the question deserved a serious answer. He thought about the years of flight training, the thousands of hours building experience, the sacrifices made to reach captain rank, the pride he'd felt being selected for chief pilot. He thought about what walking away from that would mean. Then he thought about his grandmother's arm broken for the crime of existing, about Veronica's smirk as she stood over Lillian's crumpled body, about 23 years of complaints ignored, about how many other passengers had been humiliated or harmed by someone the airline had protected through willful negligence. "Then I'll find another way to fly," he said simply. "But I won't be able to live with myself if I let them by my silence while they keep hurting people." 2 days later, Jennifer Walsh filed a lawsuit in federal court. The complaint was 93 pages long and read like an indictment of everything broken in commercial aviation. It named Veronica Hale as the primary defendant, but it also named the airline, the CEO, the VP of flight operations, and 3 supervisors who had received and ignored complaints about Veronica's conduct over the years. Count 1, federal assault under the Air Carrier Access Act. Count 2, violation of civil rights under Section 1981. Count 3, negligent hiring, retention, and supervision. Count 4, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Count 5, battery. Count 6, elder abuse under federal protective statutes. The damages sought were specific and devastating. Full compensation for medical expenses, past and future. Compensation for lost wages, pain and suffering, and loss of enjoyment of life. And punitive damages against the airline in an amount sufficient to deter future misconduct and send a clear message that corporate indifference to passenger safety will not be tolerated. But the most powerful part of the complaint wasn't the legal claims or the damage figures. It was the narrative section that laid out in excruciating detail exactly what had happened to Lillian, supported by timestamps from video, witness statements, and medical records. It named every moment of humiliation, every instance of discrimination, every escalation that the airline's employees had either perpetrated or failed to prevent. And it included an entire section documenting the 12 previous complaints against Veronica Hale that the airline had received and ignored. Complaints from passengers who'd been verbally abused. Complaints from other flight attendants who'd witnessed discriminatory behavior. Complaints from supervisors who'd recommended discipline that was never imposed. Jennifer had obtained those records through a combination of legal subpoenas, Freedom of Information Act requests, and cooperation from whistleblowers within the airline who were disgusted by the institutional cover-up. Each complaint was cited by date, reference number, and outcome. The pattern was undeniable. The lawsuit made national news within an hour of filing. Legal analysts called it one of the strongest civil rights cases in aviation history. Commentators noted that the video evidence and documented pattern of ignored complaints made the airline's liability almost impossible to defend. The airline's stock dropped another 6%. 3 members of the board of directors issued a joint statement calling for CEO Brennan's resignation. Major institutional investors announced they were divesting from the airline until meaningful reforms were implemented. Flight attendant unions across the industry issued statements supporting the lawsuit and calling for industry-wide policy changes. The pressure became unbearable. 10 days after the lawsuit was filed, the airline's legal team reached out to Jennifer Walsh with a settlement offer, $20 million. Full medical coverage for life. A confidential agreement that Lillian would not speak publicly about the incident or the settlement terms. Jennifer presented the offer to Isaiah and Lillian in a conference room at her law office in Albuquerque, where Lillian was staying with Isaiah while recovering from surgery. $20 million is a substantial offer, Jennifer said carefully. It's more than we'd likely get from a jury, even with video evidence and a sympathetic plaintiff. It would set your grandmother up financially for the rest of her life. Pay for all medical care, physical therapy, home health assistance if needed. You could invest it and live comfortably on the income. What about the policy changes? Isaiah asked immediately. What about the Independent Oversight Committee, the bias training, the public reporting of discrimination complaints? Jennifer's expression told him everything he needed to know. They're not offering any of that. This is purely a financial settlement. They want this case to go away quietly. Then the answer is no, Isaiah said flatly. Baby, wait, Lillian interjected, her voice strained. $20 million? That's more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. That's your inheritance, your security, your children's college funds someday. You can't just dismiss that. Watch me, Isaiah said. Graham, what good is $20 million if it means the next elderly black woman who boards that airline gets treated exactly the way you were treated? What good is financial security if we buy it with our silence while they keep abusing people? But it's not your decision alone, Lillian said gently. It's my injury, my lawsuit. Don't I get a say in whether we settle? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Legally, Lillian was the plaintiff. It was her case, her choice. Isaiah could advise, could advocate, could express his opinion. But he couldn't force her to turn down $20 million and continue a fight that would be exhausting, invasive, and potentially unsuccessful. He took a breath, trying to calm the frustration and fear roiling in his chest. You're right. It's your decision. And whatever you decide, I'll support you. But Graham, I need you to understand what accepting this settlement means. It means signing a confidentiality agreement that prevents you from ever talking about what happened. It means the airline gets to frame this as a one-time incident with a rogue employee rather than a systemic failure. It means Veronica's history of abuse stays buried. It means nothing changes. Lillian was quiet for a long time, her good hand resting on the cast that covered her right arm. Finally, she spoke. Tell them no. Tell them we want the policy changes, the oversight, the transparency. Tell them we want accountability, not just money. Jennifer smiled. Are you sure? Because once we reject this offer, there's no guarantee they'll come back with another one. We could end up going to trial, which could take years. And trials are unpredictable. Even with strong evidence, juries sometimes side with corporations. I'm sure, Lillian said, her voice steady. I've spent my whole life taking what I was given and being grateful for it. Taking the lowest wages because something was better than nothing. Taking disrespect because fighting back seemed too dangerous. Taking discrimination because that's just how the world works. I'm 72 years old. I don't have a lot of years left. But I'll be damned if I spend them knowing I had a chance to make things better and chose money instead. Isaiah felt his throat tighten with pride and love. This was the woman who'd raised him. This was the strength that had kept their family together through poverty and loss and endless obstacles. This was what integrity looked like. Jennifer made notes on her legal pad. All right, I'll reject the settlement and counter with our original demands. Full compensation plus the policy reforms. Let's see if they're willing to negotiate. They weren't. Not at first. The airline's legal team responded with increasing hostility as the case moved forward. They filed motions to dismiss, arguing that the airline couldn't be held liable for the actions of one employee. The motions were denied. They filed motions to limit the evidence about previous complaints, arguing it was unfairly prejudicial. Those motions were also denied. They demanded that the video be excluded because Isaiah hadn't had permission to record. The judge laughed that argument out of court, noting that there's no reasonable expectation of privacy on a commercial aircraft. Discovery was brutal. The airline was forced to turn over thousands of pages of internal documents. Emails discussing how to handle Veronica's complaints, memos from HR recommending she be fired that were overruled by operations managers who didn't want to deal with the staffing shortage, performance reviews that glossed over passenger complaints in favor of highlighting her punctuality and technical competence. One email, sent by a regional supervisor to the VP of Flight Operations 3 years earlier, was particularly damning. Veronica continues to generate passenger complaints, particularly from elderly and minority passengers. However, her technical performance is excellent and replacing her would require training a new lead FA. Recommend we continue monitoring but take no formal action at this time. That email alone was worth millions in punitive damages. It proved the airline knew Veronica was discriminating against vulnerable passengers and chose not to act because it was more convenient to ignore the problem than to solve it. Depositions began. Isaiah sat through 8 hours of hostile questioning from the airline's lawyers, who tried desperately to suggest he was exaggerating what happened, that he had ulterior motives, that he was using his grandmother's injury to advance some kind of political agenda or shake down the airline for money. Jennifer shut down each attack with surgical precision, producing the video evidence that contradicted every insinuation, reminding the airline's lawyers that their questions were being recorded and would look horrific if played for a jury. Lillian's deposition was worse. They tried to suggest she'd been confused, that her arthritis had made her unsteady, that maybe she'd fallen and broken her own arm and misremembered how it happened. They questioned whether she'd really been in pain or was exaggerating for sympathy. They implied that, as a cleaning woman with limited education, she might not be reliable about what she remembered. Jennifer called a halt 3 times, threatening to walk out and seek sanctions for harassment. Lillian held up remarkably well, answering each offensive question with dignity and clarity, never losing her composure even when it was clear the lawyers were trying to provoke her into an emotional outburst they could use against her. The worst moment came when the airline's lead attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Victoria Cross, asked, "Mrs. Crow, isn't it true that you only bought a first-class ticket because your grandson gave you the money, and you'd never actually flown first class on your own before?" "That's correct," Lillian answered calmly. "And isn't it also true that you felt out of place in first class, that you weren't comfortable there, that you felt like you didn't belong?" Jennifer objected immediately, but Lillian held up her good hand. "I'll answer. Yes, I felt out of place, but not because I didn't belong there. I felt out of place because your employee made it very clear through her actions that she believed I didn't belong there. She made me feel unwelcome, unwanted, and eventually unsafe. But feeling out of place because someone is discriminating against you is very different from actually not belonging somewhere. I had every right to be in that seat. I paid for it. I followed every rule. The only person who didn't belong on that aircraft was the flight attendant who broke my arm." The deposition room went silent. Even Victoria Cross seemed momentarily at a loss for a follow-up question. As the trial date approached, public pressure on the airline intensified. Activist groups organized protests at major airports. Passengers began posting their own stories of discrimination on flights, creating a cascade of allegations that the media eagerly reported. Congressional representatives announced they were introducing legislation to strengthen passenger protections and create federal oversight of airline discrimination complaints. The airline's reputation was in freefall. Booking numbers dropped. Corporate clients began switching to competitors. The board forced CEO Brennan into early retirement and brought in a new CEO, Maria Sanchez, who'd built her career on corporate reform and crisis management. One of Sanchez's first acts was to reach out to Jennifer Walsh directly. Not through layers of lawyers, not through corporate communications intermediaries, but a direct phone call requesting a face-to-face meeting. "She wants to talk settlement," Jennifer told Isaiah and Lillian, "but she's framing it differently than the previous offer. She's talking about partnership, about working together to create meaningful change. She wants to meet with both of you personally." "It could be a PR stunt," Isaiah said skeptically. "New CEO comes in, makes sympathetic noises, gets us to settle quietly so she can claim she fixed the problem." "It could be," Jennifer agreed. "Or it could be genuine. Either way, I think we should take the meeting. Worst case, we waste an afternoon. Best case, we get what we've been fighting for." The meeting took place in a neutral conference room at a downtown Albuquerque hotel. Maria Sanchez arrived without an entourage of lawyers, bringing only her chief operating officer and newly appointed VP of Diversity and Inclusion. She was in her early 50s, Latina, with the bearing of someone who'd fought her own battles to reach executive leadership. She stood when Lillian entered, came around the table, and did something unexpected. She took Lillian's good hand in both of hers. "Mrs. Crow, I'm Maria Sanchez. Before we talk about anything legal or corporate, I want to say something as one human being to another. I am profoundly sorry for what happened to you. What Veronica Hale did was unconscionable. What my airline allowed to happen through years of negligence was inexcusable. You deserved better. You deserve better. And I'm here to try to make that right if you'll let me." Lillian studied her for a long moment, searching for insincerity and apparently not finding it. "Thank you. That means something." They sat. Sanchez pulled out a folder, but she didn't open it immediately. "I've spent the past 3 weeks since taking this position reviewing everything that led to this catastrophe. Every complaint that was filed and ignored. Every warning sign that was dismissed. Every opportunity we had to prevent what happened to you and failed to take. What I found disgusted me. This wasn't one bad employee. This was systemic rot. A culture that prioritized operational convenience over passenger dignity. Leadership that valued profit margins over human decency." She opened the folder and slid documents across the table. "This is what I'm proposing. Not as a settlement offer designed to make you go away, but as a partnership to fix what's broken." The documents outlined a comprehensive reform package. Establishment of the Lillian Crow Passenger Protection Initiative, an independent office with authority to investigate all discrimination complaints, with findings published quarterly in public reports. A review board that included civil rights advocates, disability rights experts, and passenger representatives, not just airline employees. Mandatory bias intervention training for all flight crew, ground staff, and management, conducted by external civil rights organizations, with annual recertification required. Failure to complete training would result in immediate suspension without pay. Revision of use of force policies to explicitly prohibit physical contact with passengers, except in cases of immediate violent threat, with any physical contact requiring incident reports reviewed by both airline management and the Independent Passenger Protection Office within 24 hours. A whistleblower protection program that allowed crew members to report discrimination without fear of retaliation, with substantial financial penalties for any manager who retaliated against reporters. Public disclosure of all discrimination complaints filed against the airline, published in annual transparency reports available on the airline's website, including information about how complaints were investigated and resolved. Financial compensation for Lillian, $15 million for pain, suffering, and medical expenses, plus a lifetime pass for first-class travel for her and any companion. Though Sanchez acknowledged with a sad smile that Lillian might never want to fly with them again. And one final provision. Captain Isaiah Crow would be immediately promoted to regional chief pilot, with a public ceremony acknowledging both his professional excellence and his courage in standing up for his grandmother. The airline would issue a formal statement that his advocacy had been instrumental in driving necessary reforms, and that retaliation against employees who report discrimination would never be tolerated. Isaiah read through the documents twice, looking for loopholes, for escape clauses, for language that sounded good but meant nothing. He found some areas that needed strengthening and made notes in the margins. But the core commitments were real, binding, enforceable. "Why now?" he asked Sanchez directly. "Why offer this now when you've fought us for months?" Sanchez didn't flinch from the question. Honest answer? Because the previous leadership thought they could weather the storm, minimize the damage, and go back to business as usual. They were wrong. This airline is hemorrhaging passengers, revenue, and credibility. We're facing potential congressional investigations and FAA sanctions. Our stock price has lost a quarter of its value. We're in crisis. She leaned forward, her expression intense. But more than that, because I actually read Mrs. Crow's deposition transcript. I watched the video of what Veronica did. I read the emails from supervisors who wanted to fire her and were overruled. And I realized that I don't want to lead an airline that treats people the way we treated your grandmother. I got into this industry because I loved the idea of connecting people, of making the world smaller, of providing service that made travel something special. What we did to Mrs. Crow is the opposite of everything aviation should be. Lillian spoke quietly. You could have just offered more money. 30 million, 40 million. Enough that it would be stupid to refuse. Why agree to all these policy changes that will cost you more and make operations harder? Because money alone doesn't fix the problem, Sanchez said simply. Money makes you go away. Policy reforms make us better. And frankly, Mrs. Crow, I need this airline to be better. I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror and believe we're doing the right thing. The previous leadership lost that somewhere along the way. I don't intend to. Jennifer was reviewing the documents with her lawyer's eye for detail. These commitments need to be part of a consent decree, not just a private settlement agreement. That means court oversight, regular reporting, and consequences if you fail to comply. Are you willing to accept that level of accountability? Yes, Sanchez said without hesitation. I want judicial oversight. I want independent monitoring. I want mechanisms that ensure we can't backslide when public attention moves on to the next crisis. Make the requirements as stringent as you need them to be. Stop right here. Let us know in the comments if the story moved you, if you're thinking about your own grandmother or the last time you witnessed discrimination and said nothing. Like this video and subscribe to this channel if you still haven't. Isaiah and Lillian asked for time to consider the offer. They left the meeting and spent the evening talking, just the two of them, in the small apartment Isaiah had rented for his grandmother's recovery period. What do you think? Lillian asked. Is she sincere? I think she believes she's sincere, Isaiah said carefully. Whether that belief survives the first time these reforms cost the airline money or create operational complications, I don't know. That's why the consent decree matters. It locks them in even if leadership changes or commitment wavers. Lillian was quiet for a while, looking at her casted arm. The swelling had gone down. Physical therapy was helping restore some range of motion in her fingers. But she would carry scars from this, both visible and invisible, for the rest of her life. Your grandfather used to tell me stories about flying during the war, she said softly, about how the Tuskegee Airmen had to be twice as good to get half the respect, about how they fought for a country that didn't think they deserved to wear the uniform. But they flew anyway because they believed that excellence would eventually force recognition, that proving themselves would change minds and open doors. She looked at Isaiah. He was partially right. Their excellence did matter. It did change some minds. But it took more than that. It took laws, regulations, court orders forcing integration. It took people willing to fight not just to prove they belonged, but to demand the system change to make room for them. Are you saying we should take the deal? Isaiah asked. I'm saying that $15 million is more money than I ever dreamed of having. But what matters more is the Lillian Crow Passenger Protection Initiative. The fact that my name will be attached to reforms that protect other people. The fact that something good can come from something terrible. She smiled slightly. And maybe I'm also saying that I'd like to see you get that promotion you earned, baby. I'd like to be there when they pin those new insignia on your uniform. 2 weeks later, the settlement was finalized and filed with the federal court as a consent decree. Judge Patricia Morrison, who'd been presiding over the case, reviewed the terms carefully during a public hearing. This is one of the most comprehensive civil rights settlements I've seen in 20 years on the bench, she said from the bench. Mrs. Crow, you could have taken the money and walked away. Instead, you chose to fight for systemic change that will benefit countless people you'll never meet. That takes remarkable courage and grace. This court approves the settlement and will retain jurisdiction to ensure compliance. The story made headlines again, but this time the narrative was different. Airline assault victim rejects millions, demands reform instead. Grandmother's courage forces aviation industry reckoning. How one woman's lawsuit changed flying for everyone.